Does anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am. Oh. They're filming us.
The heroin pill that you mentioned, is it more lethal than if you shot it up or if you did the other way?
It all depends on the potency and the patient. It's the two P's, right? The potency of how much heroin is actually in whatever form it's in, right? If it's 1% heroin, obviously 100% is more deadly than 1%, and then it depends on the patient. Is the patient a veteran user of the drug, or are they a first-time user and they're very naive? So, guess what? You don't know that combination. You don't. That's what makes it so deadly, right? So, yes, sir.
Is heroin quickly deadly, or does it string out? Can a person be drinking alcohol? Is there a little heroin, or how does that work?
So the scenario exists on the potency again. If we see a highly potent heroin, it is injected intravenously. We sometimes find the needle in the person's other hand. I mean, they die with the needle in their hand. That's how fast it can happen. You add something like alcohol, which is another depressant, that's two depressants, you're just compounding the effect of both of those drugs from a respiratory standpoint. Does everybody understand? I guess I failed to mention that. Heroin is a depressant like alcohol is a depressant. It slows the central nervous system down. It slows your respiratory drive down. Essentially, you stop breathing, and when you stop breathing, there's no oxygen, and your brain dies, and your heart dies after that. So, anybody else? Oh.
So you mentioned that thus far this year, there's about 27 deaths thus far. Can you tell us the gender or the race prevalence of those 28 so we can kind of get an idea about the population thus far?
Yeah. So I can't break them all down, like tell you that there's 13 and 14, but you're looking, it's really is a 50-50 mix of people. The deaths this year happen to be a little more swayed to the male side of the equation. That's not to say that last year we didn't have more females either. The point is that it's equal male, female, it's equal race, it's equal socioeconomic status. You see it all the way across the board of who's getting involved in this. So certainly you can't predict it. That makes it very difficult, right? If you could predict it, then you could prevent it. So that's a challenge.
Where are we on the, and I don't want to say it wrong, but there was an antidote for this type of thing supposed to go through the legislature and get passed that they could breathe, or if somebody was suffering a heroin overdose, they could ingest it and stop the effects immediately.
Sure, so there's a drug, it's called naloxone, or Narcan is the trade name. It's been around for a long time. It is basically a reversal agent for opiate overdoses. Has been in emergency departments for a very long time. It has been extended into the community through EMS, and recently, 2 years ago, they said let's put it in the hands of firemen and police officers, because oftentimes they are at the scene even before the paramedics with the EMS truck get there. So, in fact, they're going through the training process, because like anything, when you're going to do something to a patient, you got to be able to know when to use it and how to use it and that sort of thing. So they're going through those training processes to implement it. I have heard, but I have not confirmed this information, that the makers of the drug saw this coming and have spiked their prices. So, which is a shame, because it's hindering the saving of people's lives. But essentially, I've heard that. I can't confirm that that's the case. But essentially, they've created an issue. You can train all these people and you can show them how to use it, but you can't put it in their hand, right? That's a problem. So, but it is available, and it's used readily in emergency rooms, so we've used it forever to reverse it. Now, the one thing I know it doesn't reverse is death, and I know that as a physician. Oftentimes, the Narcan, naloxone, people try to sell it to me, and I'm like, by the time they call me, it's way too late for Narcan. But I do direct them to the fire department, the police department, where it could actually be utilized. So yes, ma'am.
Of the 28 that you spoke of, is that the number across Louisiana, or that's just here in the Baton Rouge area?
That's just East Baton Rouge Parish. Okay. Yeah, that's just my jurisdiction. Death in general is always going to be proportional to the size of your parish. We have 450,000 people in East Baton Rouge Parish, so obviously our numbers of things are going to be higher than other people's numbers of things. But still, when you see something like heroin toxicity or heroin death, which by the way is 100% preventable, right? Don't use heroin, you won't die from it. So it's something that we need to get the word out to people, just not to use that. And if you know somebody that's got a addiction problem, get them help before it's too late. And certainly that modality can happen in a few ways. We have certain behavioral health clinics throughout the state of Louisiana that assist with that, but also you have a corner in every parish. And through my office in the mental health work we do, you can file what's called an order of protective custody where we can pick somebody up and bring them in to be evaluated.
I'm Trevor. I'm Dr. Clark's Chief of Operations. We want to let you know that the PSA that you saw is on our website along with an anti-mojo campaign, and we're asking that everyone share as much as we can on social media to get the word out, and that way that someone may reach out to get help in behavioral health centers across the state.
Yeah, it is absolutely available free for anybody who wants to take it and show it to somebody. If it saves a life, that's what matters to me the most.
The question I have is, why do people use that? I mean, what's the draw?
To opiates in general? Opiates, one of their effects is a euphoria, make you feel good. So people are looking to get high and feel good, and if they have an addictive disorder, a psychiatric addictive disorder, then it would be a drug considered in that world ideal for them to feed their addiction because it makes them happy, right? Problem is that if you go too much, you get too happy, right, where you start to go down at that point. So, but I'm not an addictionologist, so I don't know that I can give any other explanation than that. So, yeah. So, yeah, people have pain, right? So that'd be another reason.
My question is, can they mix heroin with another drug, and the person who thinks they're taking another drug can actually have the heroin mixed in with it and still die from that?
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about what they call bathtub chemistry, right? So just so you understand, when people are mixing up heroin and they're selling drugs on the street, this isn't a laboratory with guys with the white suits and the little caps on, right? Like they would to make your prescription drugs. This is basically some guys with powder in a Ziploc bag and they're trying to put it into some kind of product to sell on the street. So they'll mix it with anything. And I'll give you an example. In 2014, we had a overdose that when we got the toxicology back, we thought, oh, this is going to be a heroin overdose. They had things at the scene that would lead me to believe this is a heroin overdose. There was zero heroin in their system. They died of 100% PCP overdose, okay? So then I went to the narcotics divisions of the law enforcement. I said, what's the deal? Why PCP? I mean, that's kind of unusual. Somebody would overdose on PCP. And they said, well, interestingly enough, we're hearing from our informants on the street that they're using the PCP to cut the heroin, all right? So what happened in this scenario? One of two things. Either the dealer ran out of heroin and just sold them a baggie of PCP and said, oh, this is heroin. That's a possibility. Or he got confused and handed him the PCP bag instead of the heroin bag. So the guy went home, thought it was heroin, shot it up, died. So that creates an issue. I know we haven't seen it in this parish yet, but I know in Jefferson and St. Tammany Parish, they've seen heroin mixed with fentanyl, and you might have heard about that in the news. Fentanyl is a synthetic opiate. It has the same effects as heroin. You put the two together, it's just a compounded effect of CNS depression and respiratory depression. So that's always bad when you put the chemicals together. So.
The number of deaths that you mentioned this year so far, is that on par with recent years, or is that higher?
So you had 5 in 2012. We had 35 in 2013, down to 28 in 2014, and to date we're at essentially 27. So we're one away from beating last year's record, and we still got 3 or 4 months left of the year. So, yes, ma'am.
Dr. Clark, I can't remember. Did you say when they press the heroin into the pill, are they passing that off as an opiate? In
Not-
other words, or are they passing it off as heroin or both?
They do both. They do both, you know. But from a business perspective, the point I was trying to illustrate, from a business perspective, if there's fewer and fewer hydrocodone pills on the market, so they can charge a higher price for them. So the hydrocodone pill, a 5 milligram hydrocodone pill used to go before diversion, before the prescription monitoring program, $10 to $20 per pill in the street, okay? Now there's fewer on the street, so that same pill goes for about $50. So if I can create something that looks like it, I can tell the buyer, oh, this is a hydrocodone pill. It's really not. It's heroin, right? And I could charge you $50 for it, as opposed to you going to the drug dealer next door and getting what you think is heroin, which has now become the cheaper of the two scenarios. So it is a bit of a ruse to do that to the addict. That's essentially trying to do that. The other thing I want to point out real quick, dealers and users, when it comes to heroin, two different people. Totally two different people. Other drugs, sometimes the dealers also use the drug, but with heroin, it is very rare that dealers are the dealers and the users are the users. So they're really kind of separated. That's why the users are the ones that need our help, right? Either through addictive disorder programs, and the dealers need to go to jail for life.
The information about the pills, is this to does the public know about this? Because I've never heard that before.
Well, the public doesn't necessarily know about the ruse that's taking place, but what we try to do, especially when I talk, is to say, you know, you have the heroin now comes in many, many, many forms, so don't be, it's not just a brown powder that you then put in a solvent and inject it into your vein. It's no longer the case. It could be smoked, it could be snorted, it could be pressed into a pill. So now they've expanded it into using it in a lot of different ways. Much like if you think about cocaine and crack, right? Cocaine could be powdered cocaine, which can be snorted or smoked, or you can bake it into to crack, which is a more solid structure that can then be smoked. Or you can melt it all down and inject it IV. So it can happen any kind of fashion. So, yes, ma'am.
Prior to the program where you reduced the number of opiates on the street, were you having as many overdoses from opiates, or is just heroin more lethal and you having even higher overdoses?
We would have people that would still overdose as a result of opiates, but typically before that it was prescription opiates because that's what they could get their hands on. You know, you walk into a doctor office A, I've got this problem, here's 30 hydrocodone pills, and 2 days later you walk into doctor office B, I've got this problem, he doesn't know about Dr. A, here's another 30, you see what I'm saying, and it just goes on. And now with the prescription monitoring program, I can see what happened at doctor's office A, and I can walk back into the patient and say, yeah, you just got 30 2 days ago, you're not getting any from me. You know, because I think that there's a problem. Either you're taking too much medication or you are abusing your medication or selling it on the street. So it really has kind of eliminated that issue.
Is there a way to tell a difference between the pressed heroin and the real opiate?
Not unless you do a chemical confirmatory test. So on the street, no. You have no idea. Just looks like a pill. And the guy who sold it to you that took your money said it was whatever he said it was, heroin, hydrocodone.
So we have time for one more question, and I'll take the last question, if you all don't mind. Okay. So you mentioned Dr. A and Dr. B, and with the prescription monitoring program, there's a mechanism in place for Dr. B to say, no, I'm not prescribing you another prescription. You just received a prescription 2 days ago. Are the physicians educated in a way whereas they could provide brief intervention at that time and make a referral to care? Not sure if you know that information or not, but...
I don't know that information, but speaking in general terms, it depends on who physician B is, okay? And what I mean by that is if physician B is not the primary care doctor, then they basically have a conversation which is, no, you're not getting the prescription. Then the patient yells at the doctor and storms out of the emergency room, right? You know, if y'all heard of that before. However, if Dr. B is the patient's primary care doctor or some other kind of subspecialist, then there's probably an opportunity for intervention. However, when you tell them they're not getting it, they're usually not very happy, especially if they were trying to get it in a very manner that's not legal, essentially. So, all right.
Is promoting screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment.
Well, the great thing is that the prescription monitoring program, it is free for every physician in the state of Louisiana to use. All you have to do is put your PIN number in, put the patient's information in, boom, you know what their prescription history is immediately. Yeah, it's not mandated to use, but certainly, the oath I took said do no harm, so I think I myself, along with my colleagues, should be under the impression that we should check to make sure we're not doing any harm. So, great. Okay, thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Kristen Daniels. Also, one thing that Dr. Clark didn't get a chance to mention, and I'm sure he's familiar with this as well, the heroin today is almost 65% more potent today than it's ever been. So you have individuals that cut the heroin because you have to step on it, as they say. And so people are using the fentanyl patches, but they're also using substances like Raid, chemical fluids that you use to clean your floors with, anything in an attempt to cut the heroin. But it's actually 65% more potent. I have a friend who's a field agent for the Baltimore DEA's office, and some of the data he gave to me indicated it's over 65% more potent than it's ever been. So actually you have individuals who are in recovery, who are getting out of treatment programs, who are relapsing, going back thinking they're using the same heroin they were using prior to going out back into jail or treatment, and the heroin is exponentially more higher potency than it's ever been before. So.
Thank y'all for having me here today. Like they said, my name's Christian McDaniel. I'm a peer recovery support specialist. I work at Capital Area Human Services District, and I work on a new grant. I'm working in East Baton Rouge Parish Prison with inmates that have serious mental illness. So that's a little bit about what I do now. I'm going to kind of skim over a lot of things, and hopefully I'll make sense. So a little bit about myself. By the way, I'm pretty graphic. I don't, I'm not going to be raunchy, but I'm very honest about everything that happened to me and the way that it's molded me into the person that I am today. So what I would like to start off with saying is that I'm a survivor of early childhood sexual abuse. From about the age of 2 to the age of 7, my father molested me and my sister. And it's something that shaped me and formed me into what was going to happen for the rest of my life. I can say at a very early age, I thought that I was special, and this was something that was very intimate between me and my father, until I found out that this wasn't supposed to happen, and then I felt dirty and violated. My father left me, he got remarried, he had more kids, and my mother had lots of trouble. She had lots of issues with me. From that age, from about 7 till about the age of 12, I was just in and out of school, being suspended, going into counselors saying, no, I can't work with you anymore, so my childhood was very tumultuous at that point. At the age of 12, my mother had fallen in love. She had met a guy who I liked. I was head over heels about. Things were looking good for us, and my mother was going to get remarried. So I lived in Houston, Texas, and we were going to go to Canton, Mississippi, where my mother was from, and we were going to tell her family, hey, mom's getting married, okay? Unfortunately, we were in a car accident, and in that car accident, my mother lost her life. So again, at this point, it set me up for a time that I felt abandoned. I had to go live with my aunt and uncle, and, I always felt different. I went into new schools, more counseling, more behavioral issues. At the age of 12 and a half, I tried to commit suicide for the very first time. I went into an inpatient adolescent psychiatric hospital where they told me I was all of those top 3 things: oppositional, defiant. I was, I had all those diagnoses, and they said take pills and it'll get better. Unfortunately for me, it didn't get too much better for a little while. I eventually got put into a boarding school, and I thrived there. I went to a military boarding school in Port Gibson, Mississippi, and the structure and that environment did wonders for me. While I was there, everything, the sky became the limit for me. Everything was wonderful. And I went and decided that I was going to join the U.S. Navy. It's what I'd wanted to do, and that's what I did. I went and I became a Navy hospital corpsman, and I served my time, and I did wonderful. I was very clean-laced. I had decided very early on that I was not going to drink. I didn't want to do that. My grandfather had some issues with alcohol. I was going to go in and I was going to serve my time, and that's what I did. And I loved it. I served my time in the Navy, and I got out, and, I'd had some things that were going on personal in my life. I'd just come out to my family, and it was a very hard time for me personally, and I resorted to alcohol. And from alcohol, I liked it. It didn't do a lot for me. But I thought, okay, I can drink a little bit now. I've finished my time in the Navy. It's going to be all right. I know that at that point in my life, I had a lot of things going on with me and my family, and, it just wasn't going well. The alcohol wasn't doing it for me. And I was at a party one night, and I was with some people, and they said, here, try this. I'd never heard of drugs. I was always very adamant against not doing drugs. That wasn't me. But it was a compromise that I made with myself. I'm going to try this. I wasn't even sure the name of it. I'm going to do it one time, and I'll never have to do it again. But methamphetamine became my slave that day. It was the first, I never heard of it. I didn't know what it could do, but it instantly made me all right with myself and the world around me. I was on top of the world. I could do anything. Methamphetamine got me into a lot of trouble. It took me a lot further than I wanted to go. From there, I tried every other drug and every other thing that you could think of. Essentially, I became homeless. I was on the streets of in New Orleans. But before that, before I was homeless, I had gotten in with the right crowd, the wrong crowd, whatever you want to call it, and I made a lot of money selling methamphetamine, which really I was supplying my habit. And on March 27th of 2007, I lived in Oxford Avenue, and here in College Town, I live right next door to the head of the LSU Law Department, and the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office had a no-knock search warrant, and they came in and found a little over 2 pounds of methamphetamine on my bedside table. My life changed then. After that, a lot of other things happened. I went on the run, I got arrested, and essentially I spent 4.5 years in prison. So I knew then in prison that I wanted something different. And I saw a lot of people coming in and out, in and out, in and out, and that wasn't going to be me. I couldn't do that. I knew that my family didn't want to talk to me. They wouldn't, I got a letter at Christmas time sometimes. I knew that I'd hurt them. I'd missed my brother's deployments. My brother was in the Marines, and I wasn't there for him. I wasn't there for my sister-in-law. I wasn't there for any of my family. I missed birthdays. I missed deaths, and that wasn't okay with me. So I got out of prison, and literally when DOC dropped me off, I was dropped off by the government street overpass, and they said, good luck. And I was like, okay, I can remember it was cold. I had boots that had holes in the bottom. I had a T-shirt that had property of DOC, and I had to turn it on inside out. But I wasn't going to go back. So I got in touch with my parole officer. I went to the O'Brien house here in Baton Rouge, and I'm not going to say it was easy, but I finished treatment there. I continued to work. I went back to school. For the past 3.5 years, I've worked as an administrator at O'Brien House. I worked on a program called CABI. Many of y'all are probably familiar with it here. I've been the peer support specialist for there. But, that it didn't stop there with all of my mental health treatment. Everything that I had to do led up to where I was now. And I want to tell you about a point in my life that really changed me, and that's been really in this past year. In this past year, I realized that I got sober, and I was still miserable. I was working steps, I was working with sponsees, I was doing all the things that I had to do, and I was still miserable. I still had all that stuff weighing me down, and I knew I had the diagnosis of PTSD. I had trauma, but what do you do with that? What do you do? I'd been to counseling, I'd done to all this talk therapy, and none of it was working. I still, at 3.5 years sober, I wanted to jump off the Mississippi River Bridge, and that's not what I got sober for. So I started doing some investigation. I have lots of friends in the recovery community, and this year I got to go to a wonderful place called On Site. It's a place in Cumberland Furnace, Tennessee, and I spent 6 weeks doing the most marvelous therapies that I've ever done in my life. Maybe you're familiar with EMDR, matrix re-imprinting. I did equine therapy, I did art therapy, and it revolutionized and changed my life and changed my recovery. It has made me come back. And before I went here, I was having issues working with my clients and working with my peers that I had. I would take on everything that they told me. I was so sad. I saw them hurting and I hurt too. And really that was just my inner child. And I know that now. So my time and my recovery story has been amazing, and I want to share with y'all just, it's one of my favorite quotes, and then I'll pretty much end. And it's what I do every day now, and I know that it's part of what's made me to who I am now, and many of y'all might have heard it. It's the Man in the Arena speech, and it was by Roosevelt. And it said, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms and great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, and who at the best in the end knows the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly." Thank y'all.